Wehrmacht planned an offensive at the Caucasian direction as early as the first days of the war. But only towards the summer of 1942, after several significant victories, the German troops advanced to the foothills of the Greater Caucasus mountain range. The German Jaegers of the Edelweiss Division were thrusting into the Transcaucasia through passes. Here in the mountains, amidst glaciers, rocks, and gorges, the events were unfolding especially dramatically, and the main hero became the Soviet mountain infantry. It was 1943. A hard and crucial battle in the Caucasian mountains was awaiting the Liberators. Alexander Gusev, Savily Romanenko, Ivan Volkov, and others in the mountain infantry of the Liberators series. When planning the summer campaign of 1942, Hitler was determined to capture the most important economic districts of the south of the USSR. Having deprived the Soviet Union of Donetsk coal, Kryvyi Rog steel, Kuban bread, and Caucasian oil, the German Force Command were expecting that the Red Army would be left without resources for further war. On June 1st, 1942, at the meeting in the headquarters of the South Army Group, Hitler declared, "My main idea is to capture the Caucasian area, having destroyed the Russian forces as badly as possible. If I do not get the oil of Maykop and Grozny, I will have to finish the war." Wehrmacht's operation to capture the Caucasus was assigned a code name, Edelweiss. Its implementation was entrusted with the Army Group A, led by Field Marshal General Wilhelm List. 5,000 soldiers and officers, over 1,100 tanks, 4,500 guns, and about 1,000 combat aircraft advanced in August 1942 to the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains. The Greater Caucasus mountain range spread 1,300 kilometers from the Absheron Peninsula on the Caspian Sea to the coasts of the Black Sea. It can be divided into three parts for the purpose of discussion: Eastern, Central, and Western Caucasus, from Elbrus to Anapa. The highest part of the mountain range is its central part. Here, average mountain height is 4 kilometers. Here, there is also the highest mountain of Caucasus Mountains, Elbrus. The height of its western and eastern peaks is over 5,600 meters. The snow line in the Caucasus goes at the 3,200 meter level. Above this line, there is the kingdom of snow and ice all year round. In the central part of the mountain range, through the Krestovi Pass goes the Georgian Military Road, and through the Manasin Pass there goes the Ossetian Military Road. To the west of Elbrus, through the Krukor Pass runs the Sukhumi Military Road. The control of these roads, in fact, meant control of the Caucasus. The mountain range is crossed from the north to the south by other less significant roads and paths, but far from all of them are fit for wheel transport, not mentioning only in summer. However, groups of experienced mountaineers are able to climb the mountain range, even the most complicated areas. The German troops planned to bypass the Greater Caucasus mountain range and advance to the Black Sea, Novorossiysk and Topsev from the west, and capture the oil fields of Baku and Grozny from the east. Simultaneously, with these turning movements, the German mountain riflemen had to cross the Caucasus mountain range through passes and advance to Kutaisi, Zugdidi, Sukhumi, and Tbilisi. In this area, units of the 4th Mountain Rifle Division, commanded by General Eagle Sear, were engaged, which was part of General Conrad's Corps. An important part of the entire operation was the capture of the Elbrus area and the passes in this area by the German troops in order to open the way to the south, to the Black Sea coast. This task was carried out by the 1st Mountain Rifle Division, led by General Lanz. The emblem of this division was the Edelweiss flower. The division and its soldiers, mountain Jaegers, huntsmen, were the pride of the German army. Staffed with the natives of the mountainous districts of southern Germany, this unit had a large experience fighting above the snow line. At first, the Germans enjoyed success. It was predetermined both by the excellent training of the soldiers and the carelessness of the Soviet decision-makers. Many military leaders of the Red Army considered the Greater Caucasus mountain range impassable, and the enemy invasion from this direction very unlikely. The passes were hardly guarded, and usually by regular infantry units. Marshal of the Soviet Union, Andrei Greco, afterwards recalled, "Most commanding officers of the front-line troops have no experience of mountain warfare. Defense and its firing system were organized only at the pass itself, instead of moving the firing units to the near and far approaches to it. Some directions were not defended at all." Only experienced climbers could go through such areas. Under the attacks of the German Jaegers, the Red Army troops had to retreat through gorges. Often they went even without maps. As a result, the Soviet units got into lateral gorges, which ended in sheer cliffs, steep snow-covered slopes, and glaciers. Without the experience of combat action in the mountains, the Red Army men died in the glacier cracks and from German Jaegers' bullets. By mid-August, the parts of Edelweiss Division approached the pass of Elbrus. After furious battles, the Germans managed to capture some passes of the Greater Caucasus Mountains: Krukor, Sanchar, Kotyotau, and Maruk passes. On August 17, the German detachment of Captain Grot captured the shelter of the 11 on Elbrus, the only hotel in the world snuggled at the height of 4,130 meters above sea level. The first wooden building appeared here back in 1932. 6 years later, a 3-floor building covered with metal sheets was erected. The building looked like a dirigible, which was doomed to stay for 60 years. The detachment of the Soviet 37th Army attacked the German units, having bypassed Elbrus from the north. Near the settlement of Kuzruk, the soldiers came across a large group of German Jaegers. With great casualties, the Soviet troops retreated to the Baksan Gorge. Captain Yurchenko's group tried to knock the Nazis out of the shelter of the 11, having bypassed them from the eastern peak of Elbrus. This attempt was also a failure. The detachment got into a snowstorm and had to turn back. On August 21, 1942, the German mountaineers who had captured the shelter climbed Elbrus and planted Nazi flags on its 2 peaks. It seemed that in a little while, the way to Transcaucasia would be open to the Germans. But as early as in autumn 1942, the advance of the Germans at the passes of the Greater Caucasus mountain range was stopped. The Soviet military command took countermeasures. Mountaineers from the entire Soviet Union were urgently withdrawn to the Caucasus from the other fronts and defense plans. Promptly, the method for training mountain infantry was developed. At the same time, the sustainable defense of the mountain range was put in place successfully. Avalanches caused by pinpoint explosions started to fall upon the heads of the German Jaegers ensconced at the passes. In the rear of the Germans, mobile Soviet groups began to act, which carried out sabotage attacks and cut ammo and food advance. Now, German soldiers were opposed not by regular infantry, but properly trained Soviet mountain infantry. In the 30s, joint German-Soviet expeditions of mountaineers, sportsmen were conducted regularly. This allowed the Germans to study the Caucasian mountains well and improve their maps. Each Wehrmacht mountain rifleman was substantially trained in the environment, close to combat conditions. And the Soviet Union met this war with the detachments, which were mountain rifle units only by their names. They differ from regular infantry only by possessing mountain guns and mules for transporting them. There were no special training in these units. They did not have either special mountain equipment or uniforms. Bad problems arose with organizing reconnaissance. Constant communication between the reconnaissance scouts and the detachments was made difficult as the available radio sets were not intended for operating in the mountains. At the beginning of the war, the uniform of the Soviet mountain infantry differed from other infantry troops only by a Panama hat. Only few mountain units were equipped with special mountain boots and necessary equipment, primarily reconnaissance scouts. Other soldiers wore standard high boots or boots with putties, which were absolutely unfit for mountain conditions. Savily Romanenko recalls, "The putties constrict leg muscles, disturbing the blood flow. If you wear such footwear, the feet quickly get swollen and tired when climbing, and moreover, putties often get caught in the bushes. Uncoil." High boots and boots with sleek rubber soles were not fit for moving around the slopes. In order to facilitate the ascent, the soldiers often put their boots edgeways, which caused foot dislocation. Commander of the Mountaineer Combat Detachment, Alexander Gusev, recalls, "We mountain climbers several times had addressed the decision-makers in the past, before the war, with the proposition of employing our experience for mountain training of the troops. But we often heard in response, 'We are not going to fight at Elbrusas.' But when in autumn 1941, the enemy captured Rostov-on-Don, there emerged a real threat of the Germans capturing the entire Caucasus. Military training facilities for mountain training began to be established urgently in the Soviet Army. Training sessions were conducted at mountain infantry divisions. During these sessions, commanders of operation units and future instructors acquired knowledge for training combat performers. Most of the time was given to special mountain training. Participants of training sessions learned the techniques of climbing mountain peaks alone and in groups. In bad weather, and right after it, the peculiarities of moving along mountain paths, grassy slopes, and slide rocks, cliffs, snow and ice. They learned how to use a small sapper shovel for safety on icy slopes, cut steps with it, stick it into cracks, and use the shovel handle as a step. But they started from scratch, mastering skills of moving in the mountains. If the slopes were not too steep, then one could ascend head-on in herringbone style. On the slopes steeper than 40%, such movement was not possible. One has to sidestep by turns. First right side, then left side on the slope. When climbing up, the body had to be bent forward a bit, and one had to stand on the whole foot. If the slopes are too steep, then ascending should be done on all fours, getting hold of the grass and knolls of steady stones. Descending should be done with legs half bent, supporting the body with the whole foot or the heel. Getting down from a steep, icy or grassy slope is to be done in crawling motion, lying on one's stomach or back to the slide, feet down. Special care had to be exercised when descending mountain slopes covered with stones. The caught stones could fall onto one's fellow soldiers who were moving below and capture the attention of the enemy with the falling sound. Special drills on wading mountain rivers were organized. Usually, there was a path leading to the ford, which made it possible to find its location. Places with the quietest water surface were best chosen for wading. In such places, there are big stones on the riverbed, which make moving easier. At the same time, one could not wade barefoot for fear of wounding one's feet, but boots had to be put on one's bare feet so that the foot wraps stayed dry. There were several variants of such crossing. The most common were the following types of crossings: one at a time using a pole for safety, two at a time along the river flow, grasping each other by the shoulders and making oneself stable by this position, in a line of 3 to 5 people. When wading a river in a line, the soldiers stood in one line along the river flow, took each other by the shoulders, and walked in this order to the opposite bank. Those who walked at the edges of the line were holding a pole in the free hand. The soldier supported himself with it and measured depth in front of him. Those who went upstream took upon themselves the whole strength of the river, and those downstream were supporting them with their shoulders. Another variant of a structure for crossing was a ring. 5 to 8 persons took each other by the shoulders and formed a ring for better stability. Crossing to the other bank was to be combined with motion in a circle. Substantial amount of time was assigned for alpine skiing. Experienced mountain climbers usually readjusted the Army alpine ski binding. They made them tougher with special clamps. This made skis more convenient and improved cross-country performance. But the newcomers very much doubted using skis in the mountains. Alexander Gusev recalls, "Some thought that in combat conditions, skis would just hinder them. This is why on the opening day of the training session, I descended a steep slope on my skis, went over a hill at a great speed, and turned around sharply right in front of the ranks of the trainees. This made the necessary impression." During practical classes, mountain riflemen realized that a soldier is helpless in the mountains, in deep snow, without the skis. He cannot either actively attack or effectively defend. The soldiers were trained how to ski along mountain slopes, run in a chain, and fire lying on one's stomach, standing on one's knees, in full height without taking off one's skis, and attack the enemy. Different units had individual trainings. Classes with reconnaissance scouts were especially focused on navigation in the mountains, the method of passing glaciers, rock falls, and assault river crossing. Often, measurers who noted down the traveled distance in steps, and azimuth men who registered the direction of movement often had to be involved in the mountains. Communication men and observers were trained. The observers had to note down individual landmarks and remember the traveled distance. With such management group, the troop could go across country without the risk of getting lost in an unfamiliar mountain forest. Much attention was paid to using small arms in the mountains. In Soviet mountain units, the weapons were just ordinary. The elevation range was designed for firing at a small elevation angle, just as in the infantry. This decreased the efficiency of shooting in the mountains. Here they had to deliver fire along steep slopes, and sometimes sheerly up or down. Alexander Gusev recalls, "In the mountains, when firing at high angle, the bullet flight trajectory changed. It became flatter. However, there was nothing about this effect in firing instructions." At first, instructors and snipers had to independently make tables of firing deflections when shooting at 90 degrees higher or lower to the horizon. A mortar consists of three main parts: a barrel, a bed plate, and a bipod gun carriage. The barrel gives the mortar projectile a direction. Through the bed plate, the recoil force is transmitted to the soil. The gun carriage supports the barrel during firing. It features an elevation and a rotation mechanism, a shock absorber, and an elevation range. For delivering a round, the mortar projectile is put down the chase. It slides down and sticks with its cap onto the firing pin. The cap ignites the charge, and explosive gases push the projectile out of the barrel. The range of fire is adjusted by altering the elevation angle or by using different kinds of charge. The main martial qualities of a mortar are high ammo power, high firing rate, low weight, and simple design. A steep mortar projectile flight trajectory allows destroying cover targets, which are difficult to destroy by regular artillery fire. At the beginning of war, mortars are only used as a means of infantry support, but soon they turned into one of the main artillery types. In 1943, mortars accounted for over half of all Soviet artillery systems. The battle experience of the Shumov brothers testifies to the fire rate of this weapon. In 1942, all 6 were assigned to one crew. Semyon Shumov recalls, "When our crew fires, 18 mortar projectiles are in the air at the same time. This means that when the first projectile explodes, we put down the barrel the 20th one, and 18 are already flying at the enemy." A team of engineers led by Boris Chavarin designed for the Red Army mortar models with 50, 82, and 120 millimeter caliber, and especially for mountain combat, a 107 millimeter mountain pack regimental mortar was created. It weighed 170 kilograms, and when disassembled, it was transported in 9 packs placed on horses or mules. In mountain conditions, the high mobility of the mortars, minimum requirements to the position size, and firing power often came to help the Soviet troops. Mortar projectiles fall onto the target almost sheer. There is no dead spot for them. They destroy a target behind a mountain range at a neighboring slope in a gorge. When training mortar gunners, special attention was given to transporting and choosing firing positions for mortars. The threats, which sometimes occur in the mountains, rock falls, avalanches, were taken into consideration. Mountain training periods finished with combat exercise. Soldiers drilled combat assault of a pass by getting into the enemy's rear, capturing a mountain river crossing. Long-distance journeys on foot were practiced. Savily Romanenko recalls, "In a training march to the Gadar Pass, we had to walk 15 kilometers and climb the 2,000 meters height. Everything was covered with snow. One could not move around without skis, but we had already learnt how to do it, and we managed to climb that height and come down all safe." Before the war, General Petrov was commander of a mountain infantry division in Central Asia. Under his leadership, 12 special mountain infantry detachments were established at the Caucasus. Each such detachment consisted of an infantry battalion, an artillery battery, a mortar company, and a combat engineer platoon. These detachments were brought into a separate special-purpose mountain brigade in January 1943. Even before that, in July 1942, a mountain division was established at a Marine Rifle Brigade. The Rifle Division 242 was reformed into a mountain division. Mountain infantry, trained for mountain battle, went to the passes of the Greater Caucasus mountain range to give a hard battle to the German Jaegers. was 1943. The winter offensive of the Red Army was developing fast. The Stalingrad group of German troops was encircled. The forces of the southwestern and southern fronts pressured the enemy, forcing it to retreat to Rostov-on-Don. The whole German Army Group A was threatened with entrapment. The Supreme High Command General Headquarters ordered the commander of the Transcaucasian Front to prepare an offensive operation. By striking at Krasnodar and Tikhoretsk, the Black Sea Front group had to cut off the railroad and shut the back track of the enemy to the northwest. The northern group of forces were ordered to follow the retreating troops of the 1st German Tank Army. The mountain infantry divisions had to clear the passes from the enemy. During combat operations in the mountains, soldiers often readjusted their uniforms themselves. They tucked up and sewed up the tails of their greatcoats, used puttees for wrapping only the ankles to avoid excess pressure on their calves. They also used captured German uniforms, mountain trousers, and waterproof jackets. By mid-war, the situation with providing Soviet mountain infantry with uniforms gradually began to improve. The summer uniform consisted of a dense canvas, windproof jacket with a hood and mountain trousers. In winter, riflemen wore a warm, wadded jacket. Being short and lightweight, it did not interfere with the movements. When there was frost, soldiers put on a fur vest underneath. Underwear, socks, and foot wraps in winter, as a rule, were made of flannel or wool. But light and warm wadded bloomers, model 1941, did not prove useful in the mountains. One moved awkwardly in these. Soldiers preferred wearing wide mountain trousers with cuffs. Lengthy walks in snowstorm in frosty weather presented special requirements to the footwear. Special insulation made of felt cloth or sheepskin fur inside, which were fastened over high boots, or boots helped to avoid freezing injuries. As for the hands, riflemen protected them from frost. Savily Romanenko recalls, "We attached our gauntlets to the ends of a rope, which we pulled through both sleeves. As a result, we could take them off fast when firing and never fear to lose them." A soldier's head and neck were protected from wind and frost by a practical cap comforter. Apart from uniforms, mountain riflemen needed also special equipment, the list of which varied depending on the nature of the terrain, the season, and weather conditions. An important element of mountain equipment was an ice axe. When climbing, the soldier leaned on it with his hand, and when descending slippery and unstable slopes, it was used as a brake and a support for balance. The ice axe helped preserve the stability of the body when moving with a heavy load. Mountain infantry, just like mountaineers, also needed axes, pickaxes, and big sapper shovels. Using these, the soldiers climbed and went down steep icy slopes and glaciers, prepared combat positions, and sites for rest halts. It is impossible to pass steep, unstable slopes and glacier cracks without an alpine rope. 12 to 14 millimeter hemp rope was the strongest. Special attention was given to footwear. It was recommended to use the so-called triconiid footwear for moving on cliffs, rock slides, ice, and wet grass. Tricony is a steel-teethed, nail-attached to the soles of mountaineering boots. They got this name from the Swiss Tricony Company, which produced them. They were manufactured from mild, natural steel and were attached onto the sole and the rand of the boot with clamps or screws. A full metal plate with cogs should be attached to the boot heel. On steep, snowy, and icy slopes, soldiers needed special metal grapnels, which were attached to the footwear. As a rule, these had 6 to 10 cogs on them, and German and Austrian mountain infantry soldiers were equipped with these fixtures without exception. In Soviet detachments, they were often in short supply. Soviet soldiers did not always have pup tents or heater pads, or, as they were called, stoves. In the mountains, it is quite often the tent, which happens to be the only living quarters, where a soldier can warm up and find shelter from bad weather. A heating pad looked like a metal box resembling a cigarette case inside, which long brewed coal or solid alcohol soaked with a special chemical substance was kept. Such heaters were indispensable in the mountains, where soldiers did not always have a possibility to fix a fire and warm themselves. By the beginning of the offensive, many key passes were still in the hands of Germans. The assault of each of them, just like an attack of a city, was a challenging and dangerous operation, which sometimes lasted for several days. The nature of the mountainous terrain allowed even small detachments to stand fast against numerous attacking forces. But mountains do not allow establishing solid and deep defense. The enemy predominantly aims its efforts to maintain the mountain passes and roads, which are very few. The defense of the Germans in the mountains was, as a rule, a system of powerful defend posts. The strongest defensive posts were established at the most important directions, where the movement of the arms of service was possible. One of the main tasks of the Soviet mountain infantry detachment was to destroy such hostile defense posts. Having received an order of assault, commanders first of all laid out the route. Walking by mountain roads and paths saved time and effort, but it was extremely dangerous. That is why routes were laid along the slopes of hills and gorges. Reconnaissance scouts were sent forward. On their both sides, battlefield security were moving. Finally, having reached the spot where the ascent to the pass started, mountain riflemen stopped to have a short rest. In a forest, soldiers fixed fire, cooked food, dried their foot wraps. There would be no such possibility high in the mountains. Then the detachment started ascending. While approaching the pass captured by the enemy, the soldiers tried to walk so that their steps were not heard. Ivan Volkov recalls, "All day long, the peak of the mountain range, which was looming up in front of us, was covered with clouds. It was clear that only in the evening, when it would get colder, they will go down. And while we did not know what was going on there, we were very careful. We chose a row of rock crowns from where we could see the mountain range, hid behind them, and began to wait. Towards the evening, the clouds went off the mountain range, and we could see people with the binoculars. They were Germans." In such situations, soldiers tried not to betray themselves and continued observation until dark. They memorized the outlines of the mountain range and estimated the forces of Jaegers which defended the pass. During observation, they tried to determine the clearly expressed pass points. When darkness fell, soldiers began to get ready for rest. Viktor Mikhailov recalls, "In the night before the assault of the pass and staying close to it, we could not afford fixing fires. We even smoked covered with great coats. Around the detachment, battlefield security stood, and just to make sure, they were prepared for all-round defense. The commander of the detachment sent scouts with assignments. They had to find out if there were Germans at the approaches to the mountain range peak. By midnight, reconnaissance scouts returned. The group which had been under the right air saddle did not see the enemy. Those who went to the left saddle, somewhere on midway, discovered a battlefield security of the German Jaegers. An open assault of passes often appeared impossible. A significant distance and steep slopes created an unfavorable situation for the attacking forces. The enemy maintaining the pass could easily shoot them one by one long before they could reach the mountain range. That is why detachments tried to attack before dawn with maximum secrecy and in groups. When the sun rose a bit, the reconnaissance group led by the detachment commander went to the slope, which was leading directly to the mountain range and the saddle of the pass. There is just 500 meters to the pass itself. No sign of the enemy was to be seen ahead of them. Well, there is no way the Germans would leave the pass without striking a blow. The commander scrutinized the slope. In the meantime, two soldiers who were in front of the others hid behind a hefty rock at the end of the slope. And right after that, two rifle shots of German snipers are heard, and the enemy opens up with sporadic fire. It means that the Germans located Soviet soldiers and set an ambush. Under fire, the Red Army men started to hastily hide behind stones and snuggled to the roughs of the terrain. But by far, not every shelter provided protection from bullets. Alexander Gusev recalls, "A peculiarity of mountain battle is that the battle is progressing as if in 3 dimensions. It is not enough to visualize the front, the flank, and the rear. What is going on above you and underneath begins to play a decisive role." Covering each other by shooting, Soviet mountain riflemen started to retreat to the rocks behind them, once running, once on all fours. But several bodies of the Red Army men were still lying on the slope. The commander gives a command, "Dig in," which in the mountains means constructing a prone trench with the scrags and stones. Soon, fire from both sides calmed down. But just as it was getting dark, some Soviet soldiers moved to the left from the slope to bypass the positions of the Jaegers. Soon, the shots were heard. The rest of the detachment also began to run inbounds to the rocks, where the Germans were ensconcing. When the soldiers climbed up, they saw a dozen of German soldiers retreating at a run under the detachment's fire. By taking advantage of the enemy retreating, the Soviet detachment starts to assault the pass from different sides of the mountain range. The Germans shot back, but did this sporadically. Their arrangements were disordered by an unexpected Soviet maneuver, and from the bottom, along rock slides, the main forces of the mountain division of the Red Army were ascending already. Several soldiers had already rushed to the mountain range. The Germans retreat chaotically and continue to fire. Right off, one of the groups of Soviet soldiers started to consolidate on the mountain range and prepare the position for defense so that to maintain it in case of a counteroffensive. Other mountain riflemen continued to pursue the enemy. The pass was liberated. The battle was won. From the beginning of February 1943, a detachment of Soviet mountaineers got the assignment to take fascist pennant flags off the Elbrus peaks and plant state flags of the Soviet Union. Climbing Elbrus in winter is a very challenging task. Thin air, frosts up to 50 degrees below zero, and strong wind. Clouds enveloping the peak reduce visibility to zero. All this demanded that the soldiers were in top physical condition and possessed stamina. 20 members of the detachment ascended Elbrus in several groups and met at the shelter of the 11. By this time, the Germans had already left the building, having blown up the food storage depot. Alexander Gusev recalls, "The fascists messed all rooms up real bad, but we managed to settle in some undamaged rooms. And it was high time we did. Foul weather was approaching. The wind was raging for almost a week. The detachment ran out of food. The situation was getting critical. Climbing Elbrus in such bad weather was getting risky, but the mission had to be completed at any price." To assault the peaks, Gusev divided the detachment into two groups. On February 13th at 2:30, Master of Sports mountaineer Nikolai Gusak led the first group to the western peak. It is 5,642 meters high. Gusak's group consisted of 6 persons. In normal weather, well-trained mountaineers could get from the shelter of the 11 to the peak in 8 to 10 hours. But over 15 hours passed, and they did not come back. Gusev had already formed a rescue unit when Gusak's group finally got back. Its participants, after an extremely hard way up in the foulest weather, accomplished their mission honorably. A red flag was now flaunting in the western summit of Elbrus. On February 17, Alexander Gustav himself led 14 people to the eastern peak. It is 5,621 meters high. The group started at night in the snowstorm. The dawn was setting in. Even sharp grapnels sometimes slid on the icy slopes, polished by the wind. In steep places, they moved serpentine style. First left, then right side to the peak. It was not possible to move the same tack for a long time. The grapnels attached to the felt boots began to slide to the side. It was more and more dangerous to walk, but they could not stop. The frost was getting stronger. To stop meant death. First, the group passed the Pastukov's rocks, which are 4,800 meters high. Many of them were getting drowsy. These were the signs of height sickness. To cut short the way, the group did not head for the saddle, but started ascending along the western range of the peak. Here, the wind was hitting Gusev and his comrades in the back, but this did not make climbing easier. They were already at the height of 5,400 meters. Each step required a huge effort on their part. And finally, the peak. The site was swept with snow whirls, but from there they could see up to the horizon, and on the southwest, up to the Black Sea. Near the geodetic station, the Soviet mountaineers pulled out of the ice the remaining pieces of the flagpole with the scraps of the fascist flag and planted the scarlet banner of the Soviet Union. The sound of revolvers and handguns echoed around in a salute. Alexander Gusev recalls, "We all were overcome with the feeling of utmost joy. The flag has been planted. We win." We felt this intensely, and the emotion was amazingly vivid. It only happens once in a lifetime. In October 1942, the People's Commissariat of Defense of the USSR came forward with the initiative of designing medals, which would be awarded to the soldiers who participated in the multi-day defense of large cities: Leningrad, Odessa, Sevastopol, Stalingrad. On November 24th, 1942, that is, the next day after the encirclement of the German troops near Stalingrad, Stalin issued a directive to start designing drawings of these medals. A month later, the first medal was awarded. About 1,470,000 people altogether were awarded the medal for the defense of Leningrad. For the defense of Odessa, medal was given to 300,000 people, and 759,560 people were awarded with the For the Defense of Stalingrad medal. 52,540 people were awarded with the For the Defense of Sevastopol medal, and also the Krymskaya Pravda newspaper was honored with this award. On May 1st, 1944, another 2 medals were approved, for the defense of Moscow and for the defense of the Caucasus. The first sketch design of the medal for the defense of Moscow, made in summer 1943, were finally approved only in spring 1944. The first holder of this medal became the chairman of the State Defense Committee, Joseph Stalin. 1,028,600 people were awarded for the Defense of Moscow medal. For the Defense of the Caucasus medal was awarded to 870,000 people. The last award of this kind established during the war became the Medal for the Defense of the Soviet Polar Regions. The Reconnaissance Department of the Karelian Front was the initiator for its establishment, and the design was elaborated by a member of the headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Elov, and an artist, Kuznetsov. The medal for the defense of the Soviet polar regions was awarded 353,240 times. The Battle of Caucasus and its oil fields ended with the victory of the Soviet forces. In 1943, Kalmykia, Checheno-Ingushetia, North Ossetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, Rostov Oblast, Stavropol Territory, Circassian, Karachi, and Adyghe autonomous regions were completely liberated. The oil fields of Mayakop and the most essential agricultural regions of the country were reconquered. But it would hardly be an exaggeration to say that the destiny of the Caucasus was resolved in the mountains. It was there, at the Caucasian passes, that the Soviet mountain infantry prevented the breakthrough of the German troops to the Transcaucasian republics, and afterwards wrested the Germans out of the mountains. The government recognized the significance of this victory by establishing the medal for the defense of the Caucasus.